Reborn after a brutal betrayal, she shocks everyone by choosing the feared vampire king as her husband, using marriage as her only way to survive and take revenge. But inside his dark palace, she discovers he wasn't her enemy at all. He'd been protecting her across lifetimes, and her rebirth awakens an ancient curse tied to their bond. Now they must outplay the traitors and break the curse, before their political marriage becomes the most dangerous love in the realm. They still whispered about it in the linen corridors, as if saying it too loudly might wake the stones. She married the vampire king after rebirth. The words sounded like the beginning of a tragedy, or a warning. Yet on the morning the palace clocks chimed their soft, underwater notes, Elara stood at a long oak table and folded sheets that smelled of rainwater and lavender soap. Her hands were red from work. A plain silver ring sat on her finger like something borrowed from a different life. Sometimes she stared at it and waited for the shock to arrive, some dramatic punishment, some grand demand, some proof that she did not belong here. But the palace only breathed quietly around her. Candlelight sat still. Windows held the pale winter sun like a secret. And Elara's difficulty, on most days, was small enough to miss if you weren't living inside it. Her sleeves were too thin for the draft that slid under the door, and her pride was too large to ask for another set. She had been reborn with memories. Not in a blazing, magical way, no chorus of angels, no thunder. Just an ordinary dawn in an ordinary room, the kind where the air felt used. She had opened her eyes and known, with a steadiness that scared her, that she had already lived once before. She remembered a cramped apartment above a baker's shop, a mother's cough, the ache of hunger that made the world narrow. She remembered dying without drama, quietly, stubbornly, like a candle refusing to admit it was out of wax. And then, impossibly, she had woken in a servant's cot inside the royal palace of Nocturne, where the rulers did not age and the night seemed to have its own etiquette. At first she assumed she was dreaming. But dreams did not come with linen inventories and aching shoulders. Dreams did not come with a schedule nailed to the dormitory door and the sharp, practical voice of the head housekeeper calling, "Up, girl." Hands move before thoughts in this place. The vampires of Nocturne were not the monsters in village stories. They were restrained, formal, careful with their distance. Their eyes did not glow, their voices did not boom. They moved quietly and wore their centuries like well-tailored coats. They spoke to humans the way one might speak to a skittish bird, with politeness and a great deal of space. It was that space that unnerved Elara more than anything. It made her feel transparent. Then the marriage happened. Not because the vampire king had fallen in love, and not because Elara had been chosen for beauty or charm. It was diplomacy, everyone said. A human consort, symbolic, ceremonial, meant to anchor a fragile peace between Nocturne and the sunlit cities that supplied grain and cloth. The palace needed a human face at its balcony sometimes, and the cities needed proof that their people were not merely tolerated but included. The selection was done with careful language, an honor, a bridge, a new chapter, yet Elara heard the unspoken truth: they needed someone harmless enough to control and ordinary enough to replace. She had stepped forward anyway. Not out of ambition. Out of arithmetic. Her younger brother lived in the city below, apprenticed to a wheelwright. Her sister was still small enough to believe every promise. The palace offered protection in exchange for her presence, and Elara knew, with the clear-eyed caution of someone who had already lost one life, that safety was not a thing to refuse on principle. The ceremony had been brief and quiet. No kiss. No music that swelled. The vampire king, King Soelen, if one used his name, though few did, stood a few paces away in a hall of pale stone. He wore a dark coat with no ornament except a single clasp shaped like a crescent moon. His face was composed, almost gentle, but distant in the way a mountain is distant even when you stand at its base. Elara spoke the vows they gave her. He answered with a single sentence, spoken evenly, for the record more than for her. "You will be safe here." That was all. Afterwards she was shown to a small suite on the eastern side, more comfortable than any room she had ever owned, less grand than anything the word queen suggested. A sitting room with 2 chairs. A writing desk. A window that faced the greenhouse roof, where rain struck the glass like quiet applause. And the next morning she asked the head housekeeper if she could return to work. The woman blinked at her. "You are the consort." "I'm also human," Elara said, keeping her voice level. "I can't spend my days staring at walls and calling it peace." Perhaps it was the way she said it, without begging, without challenging, or perhaps the housekeeper simply didn't want another complication. Either way, she was given a compromise. Elara would work in the linen rooms and the kitchens, but with fewer hours and fewer eyes on her. It suited everyone. The palace could say the consort lived among its people, and Elara could keep the steady rhythm that held her together. Still, there were moments she felt the weight of the title in the smallest places. At meals, servants began to stand when she entered, unsure whether to bow. She asked them not to. Some obeyed. Some couldn't, fear trained too deep. The vampires who passed her in corridors looked at her with a brief, unreadable pause, as if she were a page in a book they hadn't decided to read. The ring on her finger caught candlelight when she wrung out cloth in the wash basin. It made her feel as if she were playing a role in someone else's story. Her days settled into a pattern: fold, stack, carry. Speak softly. Listen. Learn which doors were for humans and which were not. Learn which halls belonged to daylight and which to the palace's long night. There were rules, too, gentle but absolute. Do not wander into the night garden after dusk. Do not disturb the western wing. If you hear music where no musicians stand, turn back. And always, always, be truthful in the house of Nocturne. Lies, the older servants murmured, were not forbidden for moral reasons. They were forbidden because the palace did not like them. As if stone and shadow could taste dishonesty the way a tongue tastes salt. Elara tried to be truthful, though it wasn't always simple. Some truths were sharp. Some truths made other people uncomfortable. Sometimes she discovered that what the palace called peace looked very much like silence. She made one friend in the kitchens, Mina, a girl her age with flour on her elbows and a laugh that seemed to warm the air. Mina didn't care about rings or ceremonies. She cared about whether the soup had enough herbs and whether anyone would notice if she slipped an extra roll into a servant's pocket. "I thought you'd be taken away," Mina said one afternoon as they peeled winter apples. "To some fancy tower." Elara smiled, tired. "I asked to stay." "Why?" Elara paused, knife hovering. She wanted to say, "Because if I sit too long, I start to remember dying." She wanted to say, "Because work makes me real." Instead she said the simplest truth. "Because I don't know who I am if I'm only an ornament." Mina studied her a moment, then nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Then peel faster. These apples won't do it themselves." In quiet ways, Elara began to stitch herself into the life of the palace. She learned the names of the gardeners, who worked even in winter under glass. She learned that some vampires drank only from special goblets brought in sealed cases, and that the palace's deepest hunger was treated like an illness, managed with routine and restraint. She learned not to flinch when a tall courtier passed without making a sound. Most of all, she learned that fear could live in a place even when no one raised a hand. The first time she saw King Soilan after the wedding was 3 weeks later. She was crossing a gallery with a basket of mended napkins when she noticed a figure at the far end, looking out through a stained glass window. He did not turn when she approached. His posture was still, hands behind his back, as if he were listening to something beyond the glass. The light threw muted colors over his coat, blue and gold, like sunlight trying to remember itself. Elara hesitated, then did what the palace expected. She stopped at a respectful distance and lowered her head. "My king," she said, quietly. There was a pause. Then his voice, calm and cool as shaded water. "Are you well?" It was a simple question, almost impersonal. Yet Elara felt, unexpectedly, that it was real, asked without performance. "I'm learning," she answered, because it was true. Another pause. "Good." He did not ask about her work, her thoughts, her memories of another life. He did not come closer. He simply returned his gaze to the window, and Elara continued down the hall, basket warm against her arms, heart beating too fast for such a small exchange. That night, she sat at her desk and wrote a short letter to her brother. She told him she was safe. She told him the palace gardens grew lemons even in winter. She did not tell him how strange it felt to be both protected and lonely. The moral pressure came, as it often does, wearing a sensible face. It began with bread. Winter tightened its grip, and the wagons from the southern roads arrived later each week. The kitchens adapted, more porridge, fewer fresh vegetables, broth stretched thin. No one starved, but the servants grew quieter at meals. Mina stopped slipping extra rolls into pockets because there were no extra rolls to slip. Elara noticed the change because she counted linens and watched hands. When people are hungry, they grip things differently. Then she saw the ledger. It was left open on a side table in the pantry office, careless, or perhaps left there on purpose because no one expected the human consort to read numbers. Elara's gaze caught on a column of flour deliveries that didn't match the sacks she'd carried. The ledger claimed abundance. The shelves did not. She stared at the ink until her eyes ached. In her first life, she had known what it was to accept shortages as fate. In her first life, she had also known the quiet shame of saying nothing because speaking felt dangerous. She closed the ledger carefully, as if it might bite. Later that day, the head housekeeper summoned her. Mrs. Harver was an older human woman with iron-gray hair and a face carved by years of managing other people's mistakes. Elara had always respected her competence, even when it felt cold. The office smelled of wax and paper. Mrs. Harver gestured to a chair without warmth. "You've seen the complaints," she said. The kitchen staff grumble. The gardeners ask for more coal. The servants talk. It spreads. Elara kept her hands folded in her lap. People are worried. They should be grateful, Mrs. Harver snapped, then softened her tone, as if remembering who sat before her. "We will manage. But we require steadiness." She slid a document across the desk. A statement, written in careful legal language, affirming that the household stores were properly accounted for and that any rumors of missing supplies were baseless. At the bottom, Mrs. Harvey said, tapping the page, "Your signature. As consort. It will quiet them." Elara stared at the blank line meant for her name. It was such a small act, in one sense. Ink on paper. A gesture that would cost her nothing immediate. It would also mean turning living hunger into a lie. She felt her throat tighten, not from fear alone but from the old, familiar urge to disappear. To let someone else decide what was worth risking. A part of her whispered, "You asked for safety. Don't be foolish. Don't draw attention." Another part of her, the part that had been reborn with memory, answered quietly, "If safety costs your honesty, what are you protecting? Only your body. Not yourself." Elara lifted her eyes to Mrs. Harvey. "I can't sign this." Silence settled in the room, heavy as wall. Mrs. Harvey's expression hardened. "You don't understand." "I understand that people are eating less than the ledger says they should," Elara replied, keeping her voice calm. "If I sign, I'm telling them their own mouths are mistaken." Mrs. Harvey leaned forward. "You are human in a vampire palace. Do you know what it means to disrupt order here?" Elara did. She thought of the rules and the quiet watchfulness. She thought of how easily a human could be moved out of sight. She thought of her brother and sister, and the promise of protection that might vanish if she became inconvenient. Her hands trembled slightly, but she did not hide them. "I won't accuse anyone without proof," she said. "But I won't cover something just because it's easier. If supplies are missing, we should find them. If there's a mistake, we should correct it." Mrs. Harvey's mouth tightened. "And if you bring this to the wrong ears, you may harm the entire household." Elara exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something she'd been holding since her first death. "Then we do it the right way. Quietly. Properly. Audit the stores. Ask the steward to review the deliveries. Let the truth be enough." Mrs. Harvey watched her for a long moment, eyes narrowed. Then she took the paper back as if it was suddenly distasteful. "Go," she said. Elara stood. Her knees felt weak, but her spine did not bend. She bowed, as etiquette required, and left the office with her heart hammering, not with triumph, but with the sober awareness of what she had just refused. In the corridor outside, she paused beside a tapestry depicting the old founding of Nocturne, a moon above a river, figures in cloaks offering hands across water. The woven faces were worn smooth by time. Elara didn't notice, at first, that the shadow near the far archway held a person. Only when she turned to continue did she glimpse the edge of a dark coat, the stillness of someone who had been present without making himself known. For a breath, she saw pale eyes, reflective, not cold. Then the figure was gone, as if the palace had simply swallowed him back into quiet. That evening, Mina found Elara in the laundry room pressing tablecloths. "You look like someone stole your sleep," Mina said, lowering her voice. "What happened?" Elara kept the iron moving. "Nothing that can't be fixed." Mina reached for a folded cloth and held it for her. "That's not an answer." Elara considered lying, then remembered the palace rule and, more importantly, her own decision. "I was asked to sign something untrue." Mina's brows rose. "Did you?" "No." Mina's face shifted between admiration and alarm. "Elara, you're brave." Elara swallowed. I'm not sure I'm brave. I'm just tired of being quiet in the wrong moments. For the next 2 days, nothing happened. No punishment arrived. No summons. No cold dismissal. The palace continued as if her refusal were a pebble dropped into a deep lake that had already smoothed over the ripple. Elara went about her work with a careful steadiness, waiting for consequences that did not come. At night she sat at her desk and tried to read, but her eyes slid off the words. She kept thinking of that shadowed presence in the corridor and the way the air had felt suddenly attentive. On the third morning, a notice appeared on the kitchen door. It was written in neat script and sealed with the crest of the royal household.